Hi, and welcome to the Lumina Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Gilder. On this podcast, we'll explore how to achieve and plan for a long, healthy life, as well as how to prepare for the inevitable and unforeseen through estate planning, insurance, and end-of-life decisions. We'll talk candidly with experts who advise high and ultra-high net worth clients so you can learn how to apply their strategies and tactics to your own longevity and legacy planning. On this episode of the Lumina Legacy Podcast, I'm joined by my co-founder, Ram. We interview Robert Waggoner, one of the world's leading experts in lucid dreaming. We talked to Robert about his multiple books, his experiences with lucid dreaming, how to lucid dream, and the amazing benefits that can come from the practice, including healing trauma, exploring one's unconscious, and dealing with PTSD or recurring nightmares. Truly incredible stuff. And I think you'll really find this conversation interesting. Good afternoon. We're here back with another special live episode of the Lumina Legacy Podcast. I'm joined by my co-founder of Lumina Wealth, Ram, and we're really excited today to have Robert Waggoner, who is the author of several books, included Lucid Dreaming, Plain and Simple, that Ram has just flashed up. Robert is an expert, probably the world's leading expert on lucid dreaming. And we've heard him interviewed. We've read his books. We are so excited to have this conversation. We think our listeners will really enjoy hearing from you, learning a little bit about how to lucid dream, but more important than that, really understanding the benefits of lucid dreaming. What does reality mean? Perhaps we can delve into that deep, challenging topic and see where the conversation goes. So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Ram. Happy to be here.
So maybe at the outset, you could just tell us a brief introduction to yourself and, when you first had a lucid dream.
Right. My very first spontaneous lucid dream happened when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And so if you can imagine this, I find myself in the public library of my town. I'm looking at the books when suddenly I see a little baby Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur walking through the book stacks. And even though I was 10 or 11, I realized this can't be because dinosaurs are extinct. So then I had to figure out, how can this be? And I realized, oh, I'm dreaming. That's what's going on here. And so I thought, well, if I'm dreaming, I can tell myself to wake up and I'll wake up safe in bed. Told myself to wake up and woke up. So that was the basic, very first lucid dream. I realized within the dream I was dreaming. I literally knew, hey, this is a dream.
So that level of awareness is something that you've talked about and have encouraged people to kind of increase as a prompt to get lucid dreaming. Have you ever wondered why at that age you were able to have that awareness, or what, based on all of your research, indicates why some people have greater awareness?
Right. It's interesting. There was a study done in Germany of German school children at this one school, ages 6 to 19. And the researcher was stunned when she realized that 51% of the students could report a lucid dream. And in fact, when I read the research, more than 25% of the 8-year-olds had already had a lucid dream. But this is something we really don't talk about in our culture. We don't talk much about dreaming, and we definitely don't talk about lucid dreaming. But these young kids had already had spontaneous lucid dreams, but this was the first person that ever asked. So to your question, I just think it's a natural, spontaneous thing that happens, and you can learn to encourage it and have more lucid dreams, but it does take some practice and insight.
And then a little bit more about your background. So you had this early lucid dream, but what led you to end up writing about this and becoming an expert in lucid dreaming?
Yeah. So if you can imagine, so back in 1975, I was a junior in high school, and I was reading a book by Carlos Castaneda called Journey to Ixtlan. And in this book, Carlos Castaneda is a UCLA graduate student in real life, and he decided to research psychoactive plants like peyote and mescaline. And so he goes out in search of a shaman or a native teacher who can help him, and he meets this guy, Don Juan. And in this book, Journey to Ixtlan, Don Juan is teaching him all sorts of things, but really not very much about psychoactive plants. But one thing Don Juan tells him is that he wants Carlos to find his hands in the dream state and realize he's dreaming. And I thought, wait a second, can you do that? Can you become aware within a dream and find your hands and all this? And so there wasn't a technique, so I just invented my own technique. And within 3 days, I had my very first consciously induced lucid dream. And so I taught myself how to lucid dream in 1975, and I kept doing it. And then I was so happy in 1980 when the scientific evidence came out that justified or validated lucid dreaming.
So let's define lucid dreaming for all of our listeners. I think we know what it means, but to be very clear, how do you define lucid dreaming?
Right. I just normally use the simple definition. A lucid dream is any dream in which you realize within the dream that you're dreaming. You literally know, hey, this is a dream. I'm dreaming this. So that would be my just very simple lucid dream definition. Now, the only thing is that once you become lucidly aware, if you're not careful, you'll just return to regular dreaming. So you might become lucid for a minute or two, and then you'll get so entranced by what you're witnessing that you'll just return to regular dreaming. So just because you become lucid doesn't mean you're going to stay lucid, but it is a state of awareness. You know, hey, this is a dream. I'm dreaming this.
I believe you also said consciously induced lucid dreaming. So you separate out consciously induced and is spontaneous the other form?
Well, I would say that my first incident that happened at age 10 was just a spontaneous lucid dream. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't see any purpose to it. I just wanted to prove it by waking up. When I began to consciously induce lucid dreams in the mid and late 1970s, that's when I realized that, wait a second, you can use this to explore, you can experiment, you can begin to kind of learn the principles of the dream environment, how dreaming really works, because consciously aware, you can experiment. So by consciously inducing lucid dreams, that really gives you an advantage to going deeper into this realm.
So is this something that has been historically known, or is this something that is only more relevant in the more recent years, since, as you mentioned, there was some scientific research that came out in the early 80s about this?
Right. That's the fascinating thing about lucid dreaming. For thousands of years, it's been discussed in wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions, native shamanic traditions. For example, in Buddhism, for 2,000 years, they've had Buddhist dream yoga, and that's where they basically marry the philosophy of Buddhism with the practice of lucid dreaming in order to come to understand the actual nature of reality. And then in Sufism, for 1,000 years, there's records of Sufis learning to lucid dream, and they used it as a way to connect to the divine. And so they still practice lucid dreaming. But if you go back into native traditions, like here in America, there's native tribes that still practice lucid dreaming and have been doing so for thousands of years. But if you're not an initiate into their spiritual society, they're not going to teach you anything. And then there's other instances of where it seems like in ancient Egypt, lucid dreaming was even practiced. So lucid dreaming has a long history, especially in spiritual traditions, but it's only been recently, here in the last 45 years, that it's been the scientific evidence has emerged.
So before we do a few minutes on how to, what about the scientific evidence? What is that scientific evidence? And can you share a little bit about how that supports your lucid dreaming approach?
Right. Right. So the way it started is the very first person was Keith Hearn, who was a graduate student at the University of Hull in England. And so he meets this proclaimed lucid dreamer, Alan Worsley, who says he can become consciously aware in the dream state. And so Keith Hearn thinks, well, how could you scientifically validate that? He believed the guy, but he thought, how could you really show that and replicate it and prove it in a scientific realm? So it occurred to him that in regular dreams, we have rapid eye movement. So a lot of times if you look at a baby or look at your partner sleeping by you in bed, sometimes their eyes are moving all around as they sleep. And that means that there's a good chance that they're in the dream state. They have rapid eye movement. So what Keith Hearn decided was to bring Alan Worsley into the sleep lab. He put the rapid eye movement polygraph pads on his eyes, and he told him before he went to sleep, hey, if you become lucidly aware tonight, I want you to move your eyes left, right 8 times. That'll be such an unusual signal on the rapid eye movement polygraph pad readout that this will validate that you're lucid dreaming. And so it was in the spring of 1975, Alan Worsley became lucidly aware, and he moved his eyes left to right 8 times. His physical eyes moved, and there were other measures to confirm that he was still in the sleep state, so they could confirm that he was sleeping. But that was the first scientific evidence. And then about 2 years later, Stephen LaBerge at Stanford University, he himself had already had a number of lucid dreams, but he basically came up with this same experiment and brought himself into the sleep lab and signaled by using his eyes. And he was really kind of the first to publish his research in a widely read scientific journal. So he kind of became the lead advocate for lucid dreaming, the scientific investigation of lucid dreaming.
Fascinating. I love that there was a scientific test with rigor that was established to kind of ascertain whether this was actually happening or not.
Didn't Stephen also study like sex and lucid dreaming in the lab?
Right. It was interesting. He got into a series of experiments where he wondered, in a lucid dream, can you affect the physical body? So like, for example, he would bring people into the sleep lab. He'd put monitors around their forearms, and he'd tell them, okay, signal when you're lucid, then signal when you're beginning the experiment. And then in the lucid dream, clench your left fist, right fist in an alternating pattern within the lucid dream. And the incredible thing was that he picked up that there was subliminal muscle movement. And so he did this whole series on, does the physical body get affected by the lucid dream? And it ended with him doing a study where he brought in some really experienced lucid dreamers. He put like 17 physiological measures on their body before they went to sleep. And he told them to signal when they became lucidly aware. And then when they did, they should try to find a dream figure to have intimate relationships with in the lucid dream, because he wanted to see what would happen to the physical body. And so they signaled when they were ready to begin the relationship. And he said 15 of the 17 measures were just like the real thing in physical reality. There were 2 that weren't quite the same, and that was the breathing rate didn't get quite as high as it would as a physical activity, and the heart rate didn't get quite as high as it would since it wasn't a physical activity. But the other 15 measures were just spot on. So basically, he concluded that a lucidly dreamt event to the body was much the same.
I think that's compelling scientific evidence. I don't think I could lie down on a couch and will myself to have sensations and experiences that will be expressed physiologically through sheer intention. So there you have it. If you're 16 to 18 years old and alone, practice lucid dreaming.
You know, it's interesting. There was a study done by Melanie Schadlich, a researcher in Germany, and she just basically asked lucid dreamers, what do you do in lucid dreams? And her number one response was basically have fun. More than 80% of the lucid dreamers are just using this state to have fun. There's others who are using it, about 50%, to deal with nightmarish things and emotional issues. And then there's about 25% who are using it to access creativity or develop skills. But it is interesting. When you become lucidly aware, the capacity for fun and that kind of exploration is just really, there's no limit to it.
So let's talk a little bit about then how to. I think there's other resources that people can access. So we don't want to waste all of our incredible time with you talking about this, but we do want to give our listeners a little bit of how to if they also want to go have fun.
Right. So I'll tell you how I did this in 1975. So I'd read that book by Carlos Castaneda. There wasn't a technique, but I knew about the power of suggestion. So I just created my own technique. And this is what I do. Every night before sleep, I would sit in my bed and I'd look at the palms of my hands while quietly telling myself in my head, tonight in my dreams, I'll see my hands and realize I'm dreaming. Tonight in my dreams, I'll see my hands and realize I'm dreaming. Tonight in my dreams, I'll see my hands and realize I'm dreaming. So basically what I'm doing is like Ivan Pavlov, the Russian physiologist. He would ring a bell every time he fed his dogs, ring a bell every time he fed his dogs. Then he could ring a bell and they would just salivate. So he had conditioned a response. So that's what I'm getting people to do here. Because what will happen, you'll be in the dream state. And what happened to me after 3 nights of doing this, I'm walking through my high school hallway and boom, my hands popped right in front of my face. And I thought, oh my God, this is a dream. And those football player guys, hey, they're dream figures. And I reached over and touched the nearby wall and it felt cool and nubby, just like a wall should be, even though I knew it was a dream. So what I'm doing here is using my hands as a signal, as a prompt to make me realize, oh, this is a dream. So that's a really simple technique that anyone can practice. Just every night before you go to sleep, tonight in my dreams, I'll see my hands and realize I'm dreaming. Another way of doing it is just the power of suggestion. And so what I would ask people to think about a normal dream. In a normal dream, we just accept whatever happens. You know, we're walking along and see something totally improbable. We just go with it. We just run with it. We don't even think about it. So we lack any high level of critical awareness. So as a suggestion before you go to sleep, you might want to do something like this. Just keep repeating in your mind, tonight in my dreams, I'll be more actively aware. And when I notice anything strange, I'll realize I'm dreaming. Tonight in my dreams, I'll be actively aware. And when I notice anything strange, I'll realize I'm dreaming. So when you find yourself walking down the streets of Paris, you think, wait a second, I live in New York City. I don't live in Paris. Oh, this is a dream. I'm dreaming this. If you tell yourself to be more actively aware or more critically aware, then you've already encouraged yourself to be in that mode. And oftentimes, that's what happens in lucid dreams. You notice something is strange, like how can I be back in my second grade classroom? You know, I graduated college. Oh, this is weird. This is a dream. That's all you have to do. So those would be really 2 simple techniques. But I do want to encourage people to be aware that as soon as you become lucid, the first thing I encourage people to do is stay calm. Because a lot of people, they become lucidly aware and they get so excited, they immediately wake up. So if you tell yourself, stay calm, or if you look at your hands or something boring like the floor, that'll help you stay calm, because staying calm is the initial battle that most beginning lucid dreamers have to deal with.
How about some expectation setting? You mentioned that it took you, I think, 3 days of prompting yourself, and then you had a consciously induced lucid dream. How long do you anticipate that it would take an average person who has experienced it perhaps before but is not advanced? And then second question would be, how often can people have lucid dreams? Is this something that you can have every night, or is this something that happens at some lower frequency and it should be expected to happen at that lower frequency?
Right. So I would say that most people should be able to have their very first lucid dream within 2 or 3 weeks of sustained practice and practicing a good practice. sometimes I get on the internet and there are some crazy ideas of how to become lucidly aware, like, oh, first go into sleep paralysis and then have a lucid dream. I've had 3 episodes of sleep paralysis, in the last 30 years. So that's like a once a decade experience. That's just crazy, unless you're a person who's having sleep paralysis all the time. So again, within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you should be able to have your first lucid dream. Now, science would say that to be a frequent lucid dreamer, according to their definition, you just have to have 1 lucid dream a month. And so that's just kind of the base rate. A beginner should try for at least 1 lucid dream a month. But I taught myself through various techniques and the techniques that I mentioned in the book that Ram showed earlier. I went from 1 or 2 a month to 3 or 4 a month, then to 6 or 8 a month. And then I figured out a way using kind of mindfulness, how to have up to 30 lucid dreams a month. Some nights I'd have 2 or 3 lucid dreams, and then other nights I wouldn't have any lucid dreams. But there are ways, if you do have that kind of ability and that ability to focus, that you can really ratchet up your lucid dreaming. But again, for most people, they're going to have maybe 1 or 2 lucid dreams a month. And my point is this: I write books so people can have lucid dreams of quality. It's just not about having numeric, oh, I had another lucid dream, I had another lucid dream. If you're not doing anything, if you're not growing as a lucid dreamer, if you're not exploring and experimenting in a deep way, then what's the practice all about? You're just, notching up lucid dreams. That's why I want people to have lucid dreams of quality, where they really explore and integrate the potential benefits of lucid dreaming. And so that's why I decided.
I'll add one point too. So on average, people have about 2 hours of dreaming per night. And many people like me will say, I can't remember my dreams. So when I started studying this subject, I maintained a dream journal. I believe you should first focus on getting a dream journal and documenting your dreams. Even if you wake up without any memory, have the dream journal next to your bed, a pen and pencil, paper, or Evernote on your phone with a red tint on, and immediately capture that. So cultivate the skill of dream recall. In my mind, it's a precondition to lucid dreaming. Once you can recall multiple dreams per night consistently, then you're ready to start going to the next step.
Yeah. It was funny. A month ago, I was giving an online workshop, and there's this young person said they wanted to have lucid dreams, but they hated dreams. Dreams were nasty, dirty, filled with conflict, and this and the other. And at first I thought, why did this person sign up for this, this workshop? Because if you hate dreams, how are you going to be a lucid dream? But my intuition told me how to respond to the person. And I said, just do the practice. Just do the practice. And within a week, this person had their very first lucid dream. And so Ram has a great point, though. It helps to get back in the dream recall. You need to be able to recall at least 1 or 2 dreams a night before you can really establish a lucid dreaming practice, I'd say.
Okay, makes sense. How about we talk a little bit now about the benefits? You alluded to this, that you want people not to just chalk up numbers and lucid dream for just the sake of saying they've done it, but rather really have good lucid dreams. What does that mean?
Right. So lucid dreaming is an open platform. You can do extraordinary things, especially if you know how. So these would be the potential benefits of lucid dreaming. Probably the very first lucid dreaming is accessing creativity. You're consciously aware within the lucid dream. Here's a great opportunity to access the creativity of the unconscious mind. And so people have told me, like professional musicians, they become lucidly aware and they know it's a lucid dream. And then they think in their mind, when I walk into that next building, I'm going to hear the most incredible music that I can create. And they walk through the door of the building and all of a sudden, incredible music is happening. Stephen LaBerge has in one of his books, Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming, about a software programmer. Whenever he got stuck writing code, he would try to have a lucid dream. He'd call on Albert Einstein to join him. And then Albert Einstein and he in the lucid dream would figure out the software coding problem. And he said when they figured it out, he'd tell Einstein to go away so he could memorize it, and he'd take it into work, and 99% of the time it was spot on. So you can really use lucid dreaming to access unconscious creativity. And a lot of people are doing this. The second thing I would say is using lucid dreaming for emotional healing. So a lot of people use lucid dreaming to stop recurring nightmares. And this is even used by psychotherapists around the world as a proven method to end recurring nightmares from PTSD. But basically what they do is they teach them to become lucidly aware just once in a recurring nightmare and change anything. And then their nightmares basically cease. And that's one of the issues with a lot of people with PTSD. That first they have recurring nightmares, and then a lot of them start to abuse substances like alcohol or whatever, just to try to get themselves to fall asleep. They're trying to conk themselves out, and once they get rid of the nightmares, then that's a big part of it. But also, lucid dreamers have used lucid dreaming to overcome phobias. I've seen people use it to overcome drug addictions and addiction to nicotine and smoking and all. And you just begin to realize that a lot of people are using lucid dreams beyond the scientific studies for their own emotional healing. Then after that, I'd say there's the issue of physical healing in lucid dreams. And this is something that I brought up in my first book, Lucid Dreaming Gateway to the Inner Self. And I started getting emails from people around the world telling me how they healed themselves within a lucid dream. And a lot of times they'd been to a doctor, they'd tried all the medications, they couldn't heal themselves. But by intending the healing and reading the chapter in the book, all of a sudden they had just amazing lucid dreams. In fact, I create this online magazine, the Lucid Dreaming Experience, that anyone can read at luciddreamingmagazine.com. And in one of our past issues, this gentleman who had a traumatic brain injury, he reports, I interview him, he reports that in a lucid dream, he resolved his traumatic brain injury. Previously, the doctor had given him 1 year to live, and that was 5 years ago. And he said in a lucid dream, he basically managed to get his brain to work right again. And he later told me that it was like someone pushed the reset button, that now his brain functioned properly after the lucid dream. So again, when you're at a deep level of the unconscious mind and you intend something, you can make profound changes in the physical system. And in fact, I think it's the Buddhists who say, the Buddhist dream yoga people say that an action performed at the level of lucid dreaming is like 9 times more powerful than one performed at the level of waking. And then beyond that, you can use lucid dreaming to do spiritual practices like meditate, ask to experience spiritual concepts. You can use lucid dreaming to engage your unconscious mind. You can reach out to your inner self and either hear a response or see a symbolic response. But again, it's just an open platform.
Wow. There's so many incredible areas to explore there. Maybe for some of those benefits, can you share some of the stories and subjective experiences either that you've had or that some people that you've dealt with have had?
Right. Probably the first thing that blew my mind was after 10 years of lucid dreaming, I was part of a Lucid Dream Explorers group where every month we had a goal to achieve in our lucid dreams. And 1 month, the goal was find out what the dream figures in your lucid dream represent. So I was on a business trip in Chicago. I became lucidly aware. I followed a woman into an office and I remembered, oh yeah, I'm supposed to find out what the dream figures represent. So now there's a receptionist, 2 other women, and a guy in a 3-piece suit. And I walk up to the gentleman in the 3-piece suit and I say, excuse me, but what do you represent? And then instead of the gentleman responding, a voice from above him boomed out a partial response of what he represented. And it wasn't a full response, so I looked up and I said, I repeated what I had heard and said, now what? And then it's like it had to think, and it boomed out the full response of what this guy represented. And so I thought, okay, I've done the mission. I've found out what this guy represents. And I woke up and wrote down the lucid dream. But the next day I began to wonder, what was this non-visible voice giving a response? And so then I began to wonder, was there an awareness behind the dream? Could you in a lucid dream interact with your unconscious mind or your inner self? And so I began to explore this really deeply. And for example, I wondered, does this unconscious mind, this inner self, understand concepts? So I had read about a concept in a spiritual book, and I became lucidly aware. I asked to experience that concept, and I had my mind blown because suddenly I began to experience this concept, and it involved mantras and the self as a vibrating sound. Just stuff way beyond what the ego self, conscious self, Robert understood. But then later I realized that, in various Eastern traditions, that they had this viewpoint about mantras.
I'll add one point to that.
That's when it blew my mind.
I've had a few lucid dreams. I struggle with stabilization. We don't have to get into that now. They last maybe a couple minutes. When I'm in there, I try to make the most of it before I fall back asleep in my dream. I did do a mantra, and I noticed that I started getting light and floating high in the sky and getting really hot, uncomfortably hot. I don't know what that means, Robert, but you're not in your head.
Well, a lot of lucid dreamers who begin to chant mantras in their lucid dream, they begin to have interesting experiences. Like you say, sometimes they begin to float up higher and higher into space. Other times there'll be like 1,000 others who are joining them in the chanting. There was a woman in Germany who sent an article to my magazine saying that she was using a Reiki chant because she's into Reiki healing. She was using a Reiki chant in her lucid dream, and suddenly an ancient Japanese woman appeared who explained to her that she was mispronouncing part of the mantra and instructed her on the proper pronunciation. And of course, there's this ancient woman in Japan who started up the Reiki tradition. So again, some extraordinary things can happen when you open yourself up to the knowledge and the knowing.
Have you done any future dreaming or past dreaming? I've seen futurescapes. I've said, look, I want to see the New York City skyline in the future. And I'm not a creative person. I can't paint. I can't draw. I'm not an architect. And what I would see is just incredibly beautiful and mesmerizing. And I try to appreciate it.
Wow. No, that's great. What I did for about 9 months is I decided in lucid dreams to try to understand if I had past life aspects that I could get in touch with. And so I'd become lucidly aware, and I had a process, and then I would encounter a past life aspect. And it was really a mind blower to see and have the experience of engaging a past life aspect. So that was one of probably the strangest things. In fact, in my dream life, I'd had a number of occasions where I would look through the eyes of others who I knew were past life aspects of myself. And like I remember one time, if you can imagine this, so I'm a teenage kid growing up in Kansas, and I'm looking through the eyes of this woman who's holding this heavy white cloth, and I can kind of feel her kind of bitter, sarcastic mind. And then she gets up in this little cabin and she's climbing up these stairs, and she looks out the window, and I can see the Atlantic Ocean through the entry of a harbor. And I ask, where is this? And I hear Gloucester. And so when I woke up, here I am, a kid growing up in Kansas, I thought, okay, there's Gloucester, Massachusetts, but the Atlantic is to the east. And I saw that harbor opening was to the south. I get out a map of Massachusetts, and the Gloucester Harbor opens to the south. I went to Gloucester about 10 years ago, and I found the exact place where this was. And this was within 50 yards of the first British fort settlement established in Gloucester Harbor in 1640 or something. It blew my mind because that geographical situation hadn't changed except for one little tiny detail, but it blew my mind. Also, the other thing that surprised me, as a little kid, I always disliked the Boston area, and Gloucester is about 40 miles from Boston. And so I'm thinking, why does a little kid in the middle of Kansas, have this kind of enmity towards the Boston area? And I think it was because of what had happened in this woman's life as one of the early settlers in Gloucester.
Can I take you back to the dream where you ask about the role that this person, dream figure, played? What was the role that dream figure played, and what are the roles that dream figures play?
Well, one thing I tell people in my workshops, dream figures vary. So not all dream figures are created equal. So for example, sometimes in a lucid dream, I'll announce that all thought forms, everything that's a thought of my mind, now must disappear. And so sometimes all the dream figures would disappear when I say now all thought forms must disappear. But sometimes there'd be 2 or 4 left over, and they'd look at me like, didn't you realize that we were different than those guys that just disappeared? So in this particular experiment, when I asked this gentleman, what do you represent? Here's what I heard. The voice boomed out, the acquired characteristics. And so that didn't make sense. There's more to it. So I said, the acquired characteristics of what? And then it stated, the acquired characteristics of the happy giver. And so at the time, I thought, okay, that's what this guy represents. But it wasn't until the next morning I realized that the day before, so this was a bit of day residue, I met this woman who was the head of a nonprofit, and she was the most bitter woman. She said, oh, the only reason people give to me is to get listed in the back of our annual report. And I thought, boy, the Lord loves a happy giver because she is such an unhappy receiver. I literally thought that the day before. And so this was a representation, a guy in a 3-piece suit, kind of looked like a banker. He was a representation of the happy giver, and he was not the unhappy receiver that woman had been.
So that same dream that you relayed to us made me think a lot. I'm like cycling through it. You also mentioned that there's this voice that booms out. What is that in your opinion? And then you were part of a workshop. Did you go back and workshop some of these things and get varying opinions on this dream?
Well, it was a Lucid Dream Explorers group. And so every month for 3 years, we had goals to achieve in lucid dreaming. And that really taught me how to be a good investigator within lucid dreaming, because every month I had a goal to achieve. And so those are all great questions, because what I realized is that behind the dream is an awareness. And if you ignore the dream figures, ignore the dream setting, and just ask a question like, hey, dream, show me something important for me to see, then sometimes the entire lucid dream can flip around and you'll be involved in something important for you to see. Or sometimes just one little item will appear, but it's something important. So I realized that there's this responsive inner awareness. So this occurred in 1985, and I was part of this group and have the physical records to prove this. But what was curious is that 8 years later, Carlos Castaneda writes a new book called The Art of Dreaming. And in that book, he asked his shamanic teacher, what is this voice that responds when I ask a question in lucid dreams? And his shamanic teacher said, I call that the dreaming emissary. It'll always tell you the truth whenever you ask a question within the dream state. And so that's what's so weird about this, is to discover this inner awareness and then also realize that Carlos Castaneda was having the same experience, and lucid dreamers all around the world are having this same objective experience of interacting with this inner awareness. So it makes me wonder if we have a bona fide inner self, a bona fide inner awareness within us, and that we focus on the conscious you and the ego you, but actually we rest on kind of this larger knowing.
Can you share what was revealed when you asked to have something revealed?
Right. I've dealt with a number of things where things have come to me, but here I want to give you an example. So one day I'm meditating about 10 years ago, meditating in the middle of the day. I get down deep and I know that I'm sitting in my chair in my home, and I know that I'm meditating, but I can feel my larger awareness as if it was a lucid dream. And so I reach out to it and ask an open-ended question. And I say, hey, larger awareness, what do you have to say to me? And suddenly I hear, we want you to send $10,000 to your friend Paul back in your hometown. And I think, what? And I come out of the meditation. And so I thought, boy, that was really weird. So the next day, again, it's 2:00 in the afternoon, I'm meditating, I get down deep. Now I can feel the energy of my friend Paul's deceased mother and the energy of my larger awareness. And so I reach out again, hey, larger awareness, what do you have to say to me? And I hear once again, we want you to send $10,000 to your friend Paul back in your hometown. And I come out of the meditation and I go find my wife and I say, look, this has happened twice in waking meditation. I think there's something going on, but $10,000 is a lot of money, so I wanted to talk to you first. And she says, well, let's send Paul a note and we'll send him $1,000 and say, Paul, we're your good friends. If you need our help, we're always here to help you. So I wrote him the note, put it in the mail with the check for $1,000, and he calls back when he gets the mail. And at first he was so emotional I couldn't understand him. And he told me that a week earlier he had gone to his mom's gravesite and yelled at it, if somebody doesn't help me, I'm going to kill myself. And I said, Paul, what's going on? And he said that 2 months earlier his dad had broken his hip in the bathroom, and now his dad was at a nursing home where they said they were going to teach him how to walk again, but he knew his dad would never be able to walk. And so he needed $10,000 to put a disabled bathroom in his house such that his father could come and live with him, and the state of Kansas would provide 40 hours of nursing care a week. And so we sent him the money. He did that. His father lived with him for 6.5 years, if you can imagine. But what I'm saying is that this inner awareness, some people access it in the waking state. Some people access it in lucid dreams. Some people in regular dreams, they'll hear a voice announce something or explain what the symbolism is. And so this is really an interesting phenomenon to get into, because this really gets to kind of the nature of consciousness.
Haven't you also interacted with someone else's dream and then woken up and done a reality test?
Right. So in my first book, I have a chapter on what's called mutual lucid dreaming, which is kind of when you interact with someone within a lucid dream and pass on information. One example of this, so I become lucidly aware in a restaurant. I'm admiring the salt crystals in the salt shaker. And I'm thinking, boy, a Hollywood set designer could never make anything as realistic as this lucid dream. Then through the door walks my good friend Mo, who lives out in the San Francisco area, and I live in the Midwest. And so I run up to Mo and I say, Mo, this is a dream. We're dreaming this. But here's the thing. She has rapid eye movement. So I know she's still in her dream and she's not aware within the lucid dream. And so I think, how can I get her to become lucid? And so I grab her around the waist and I start floating up through the restaurant. And she still doesn't become lucidly aware. She still has rapid eye movement. And so now I'm getting frustrated. I think, how can I get her to become lucid? So this is what I do. I put my fingers in a peace sign and I shove it right into her face. And I go, Mo, do you see this peace sign? You can use it as a sign to become lucidly aware anytime you want. And that's the end of the dream. In the morning I wake up, there's no email, there's no text message, there's no phone call. So I didn't tell this to anybody. About 4 months later in waking reality, I'm out on the West Coast on a business trip, and I'm in the Bay Area. I call up Mo and I say, "Hey Mo, if you have time, I can meet you for lunch." And so she tells me where to meet her in Burlingame. I'm outside the restaurant. This is waking reality. She comes walking down the sidewalk, and before she says anything to me, she puts her fingers in a peace sign and she shoves it right in my face. And I said, "Mo, why are you doing that?" And she said, "I don't know why. I just felt like it." So this would be kind of one of those curious things where within a lucid dream, you could pass on information to somebody, and at a subconscious level, they'll get it, but they won't even understand why. I mean, this is really kind of a,
Esoteric,
something you could.
advanced AP class, chapter 10.
We need to linger on this topic. What does this mean about consciousness and reality? You are interacting with not just the past self, other people. What do you think reality is?
Let me add one point to that, and we'll get to the question back. My wife, my beautiful, lovely wife, her sister passed away 2 years ago. She's 37 years old, untimely death. It was a postpartum passing. It was only 12 to happen in a year. It's heartbreaking. My wife is a natural lucid dreamer. She's she just says, "I want to have a lucid dream." She'll have a lucid dream. Me, I have to beg and read this book 1,000 times, and then maybe I'll get one on Thanksgiving, which is when I usually have them. I don't know why. And she'll wake up and she'll say, "I had a chat with my sister last night." Only for a few minutes. It's not like an extended thing. And I'm just reporting what she's reported to me. I'm not making ontological claims about the universe, other thing. I'm just merely telling a story someone told to me, and I trust my wife. And I don't know, Robert, if you want to riff off of those two comments.
So like on January 1st, 2022, the first dream that I recall of that year, I see my wife's mother-in-law, Nona, who passed away, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. And so I see her in the dream state, and she looks about 40 years old. She doesn't look like 86, which she was when she passed on. And so I immediately begin to laugh because I become lucidly aware. And I think, holy smokes, it's been almost 20 years, and finally Nona's coming to visit me. And so I'm lucidly aware, and I go up to Nona and I say, "What do you have to tell me?" And she goes, "I want you to know that September is a very important month." And I look at her and start joking around, and I say, "Well, Nona, if you believe September is important, I'm sure it's important." And she looks at me and goes, "No, I want you to understand that September is a very important month." And all of a sudden it hits me. If someone from the realm of the deceased is coming to tell me that September is a very important month, there's probably a good chance it has to do with someone in my life going to pass on. And so I woke up from the lucid dream, and I told my wife that I think your mom came to tell me that my mom is going to pass away in September. And anyway, to make a long story short, the last week of August, we go visit my mom. She's doing relatively well, and we have a nice conversation and say goodbye. And the next weekend, she passed away, the very 1st of September. So again, it brings up this issue. First, it brings up kind of a curious thing. I've noticed this with deceased interactions in lucid dreams. Sometimes they don't tell you everything. They kind of hint at what's going to happen, but they don't say, on September 3rd, your mom's going to die and yada, yada, yada. That they just say, hey, September is a very important month. Maybe I could have asked, like, why is it important? And then they might have told me why. But anyway, that is one of the curious things about lucid dreams. A lot of people become lucid, like Ram's wife, when they interact with a deceased person, because they see the person and they think, wait a second, that person's been dead for a while. Oh, this is a dream. I wonder if they have anything to say to me. And that's what I always encourage people. Go up and ask, what do you have to say to me? Because sometimes they're there for a reason. They're just not there as
back to Justin's earlier question, are there other common archetypes or figures in the dream that come up? Like, I don't know, the gesture. I remember one time I was at a Paris cafe and had a coffee with my subconscious. Only happened once. It was bizarre. I won't go into that story now, but Robert, is there anything like that?
Yeah, Carl Jung brought up the idea of archetypes. Like the old woman, the wise old woman, the trickster, the jokester, and all that kind of thing. One area that I really think he brought up that's really important is the shadow, and that's the denied, ignored, repressed parts of the self. And so, oftentimes, Carl Jung would say the shadow exists in the space behind you because you're not facing it. You're turned away from it. You're ignoring it. You're denying it. But I've had experiences where I could feel energy behind me, and I turn around, and there's a figure, and then when I ask the figure, "What do you represent?" it tells me what it represents, and it's always a shadow aspect thing. And what my process is to send it what it lacks. So if it feels unaccepted, I accept it. If it feels angry or hopeless, I send it hope and love. And in those ways, you begin to kind of realize that mental energy gets projected out there into many of these dream figures, and they represent something, but you got to ask them an open-ended question. Who are you? What do you represent? If you want to get to the bottom of it.
Wow. So
there's
some very interesting parallels between plant medicine and some of the experiences that we've discussed on this podcast, and what you're describing today in terms of kind of energy and consciousness, and not just the subjective experience, but also some of the ways in which you talked about its ability to heal. I mean, plant medicine is being studied in PTSD. It's being studied in depression.
Right.
It's being studied in addiction, and it's having tremendous benefits in those areas. What do you make between the connection between these two? And then B, can you talk a little bit about some of the research that is going on into how lucid dreaming can benefit in those areas?
Right. One thing that's really struck me is that oftentimes when I would read about psychedelic experiences, especially ones that involve plants like ayahuasca and all, oftentimes they're very similar to a lucid dream, but it's kind of a chemically induced lucid dream. So the person doesn't have as much ability to influence or manipulate. And so they're kind of being swept downstream in the experience. And so one thing that surprised me when my first book came out is I'd have people who were deep into psychedelics telling me how helpful my book was, because in my book, I tell how to relate to a dream. You have to look at your own beliefs and expectation, your focus, your intent, basically your mindset, in order to understand the experience. And that's the thing that I don't think a lot of people who get involved in ayahuasca and other experiences, they don't realize how their beliefs and expectation and focus can kind of subtly influence and manipulate the experience. But a lot of them have realized, don't do this when you're in a state of depression, because then you'll have a bad trip. I mean, they figured that level out. But people who are really into it realize that, there's kind of a cross training that occurs between lucid dreaming and these plant medicine experiences. If you know how to use your beliefs, expectation, focus, intent, you can really begin to change things. What I've been working lately with a gentleman who is involved in using ketamine to relieve depression, and he'll talk to me about some of these ketamine experiences, and they're quite similar to induced lucid dream, but they're kind of a little bit far out of the norm. So I think there's really a way, if lucid dreamers would start to talk to plant medicine researchers a little bit more, they'd begin to see that, there's a lot of connections here in how to work with the mind, how to engage the unconscious in a beneficial way for the.
Well, you touched on two names here. One is Carlos Castaneda. He himself was a bridge between both of these worlds. The hands technique you shared, and he was writing about indigenous tribes' usage of plant medicine. And then Carl Jung, who was having seizures and what he would call mystical experiences when he was 10 or 11, those were not aided by psychedelics, but the similar kind of experience. In fact, maybe it's not the fact that one experience is a lucid dream and the other experience is a psychedelic dream. Maybe the common fact is that it's a mystical experience.
Right. Well, the beautiful thing about lucid dreaming, I think it begins to uncover the fundamental framework of encouraging mystical experiences. Like, for example, when I give workshops, a lot of times people raise their hand and, oh, so in a lucid dream, I could interact with Buddha or Allah or Jesus or whatever. I tell them, look, don't try to do it. You'll get too excited and you'll wake up. So instead, I ask people when they become lucidly aware, if they want to have a spiritual experience, just stabilize the lucid dream and then announce to your larger awareness, hey, let me experience unconditional love. Or, hey, let me experience 1 minute of samadhi. Or, hey, let me experience, a moment of atonement or at-one-ment. And people have their minds blown. Because when these conceptual experiences are felt throughout the body, that they're just blown away. So lucid dreaming shows us kind of a way to enter into a mystical experience by basically accessing the broader knowing.
I think the key word used in everything there was "and experience." It's not about being intellectual or conceptual. You read a book about these states of mind in school. You read about what does it mean to be enlightened in Zen Buddhism. I could give you an answer to that with the words. I don't think I've experienced it, but what you're describing, Robert, is direct, unintermediated access to this state where it's shown or it's revealed or it's experienced, and it's felt then as a truth. And by the way, the truth of my own subjective experience, I can't prove to anyone. It's a private truth I have, but I know it's true. I hope you trust me that I trust that you guys are aware and subjectively experienced as well. So I think it speaks to this other word you've been using throughout this, which is intuition. There's this concept of intuitive knowledge that is not derived from some objective empirical assessment.
Right. No, exactly. You're exactly right. Here's the thing about lucid dreaming. I think lucid dreaming is going to help us expand what the self is, because I think we've become too connected to the ego and the conscious self, and we're forgetting this whole other part of the self, this inner self, this inner knowing, this unconscious self. And lucid dreaming is finally beginning to open up that the unconscious isn't just a waste dump of crappy memories and negative hostile feelings and stuff like that. That the unconscious is really the supportive knowing that keeps the conscious self and ego going. And so that's the beautiful thing about lucid dreaming. I know the science hasn't gotten there yet, but I think this is why Buddhists and other wisdom traditions revere lucid dreaming when they marry it with their philosophy, because it gives them direct experiential evidence of that.
Right, direct
of that
experiential
truth.
evidence. There's another author named Ian McGilchrist who's been studying ancient wisdom traditions. I see you nodding your head there. And he has a thesis, if I simplify it, is that modern civilization is too left brain. The left brain is verbal. It's about making distinctions, eliciting concepts, intellect, ideology, and it's lost all connection with intuitive knowledge and the greater wisdom of the right brain, which perceives the whole and will also make a better decision, as opposed to the left brain, where it's caught up in its own neuroses and it's trying to, like a dragon catching its own tail. So you've heard of Ian McGilchrist? Any reactions on that?
Right. And I think that's the nature of society, that we have gone too deep into that ego conscious self, and we have lost touch with our own inner knowing. I'll tell you something really strange that happened to me about probably 8 years ago. So I become consciously aware, and I'm looking at a woman who looks like she's about 35. And then there's a man right next to her who looks like he's about 35, but he's asleep. His eyes are closed. And so I know this is a lucid dream. And she looks at me and she says, I want you to understand that about 100 years to you is 1 year to me. And I start to do the math in my head, and I think, oh crap, I'm talking to someone who's 3,500 years old. And so I figure that out. And then she says to me, I want you to understand that ancient spiritual knowledge is returning to your system. And I said, what? And she says, I want you to understand that ancient spiritual knowledge is returning to your system. And I woke up from this experience and I thought, this is like from some science fiction book, that you would meet a being that basically claims to be about 3,500 years old. And it's just there to tell you that ancient spiritual knowledge is returning to your system. And I think the reason it's telling me that is to not get totally freaked out when I see what a messy job all of us so-called conscious beings are making of the world. That this is about the low point in human existence. And now I think ancient spiritual knowledge is returning and people will begin to wake up to it. But it's happening in the woman first, so kind of the feminine, the unconscious. It's happening within the depth of people. And when the man wakes up, it's kind of symbolically saying that it'll get expressed out there in the physical world. But I had some other experiences with these two, and basically it showed me that there's some difficult times coming, but at the bottom of it is the rebound. It's the spiritual growth that basically happens.
So you had some prophetic dreams as well?
Well, I would say these were prophetic. I don't want to talk about them, but what it would suggest is that we have some troubling times ahead of us. But again, if people will focus on their spiritual growth, and it's not so much, just getting kind of a spiritual perspective on things, or getting an intuitive perspective or a different perspective on things, that there's more going on than the surface.
Well, you talk about, waking up. In a dream, we're walking around unaware and unawake, and then you achieve lucidity, and now you're awake in your dream. And you kind of wonder the question of how many of us are walking around like non-player characters and NPCs in the real world. There's a symmetry in the dream life and a paradox, right? In the dream life, we sense even though our senses are asleep. We taste even though our tongue isn't doing anything. We hear even though our ears are silent. So we're perceiving reality. We're perceiving distance and space. We're interacting with other characters. We have no ability to predict what they're going to say. It's as if they're independent from us when we know they are part of our mind. And so what are the inferences that one can apply to waking reality from that experience of lucid dreaming?
So one of the most important aspects of lucid dreaming is you begin to see how the mind creates through your beliefs, expectation, focus, and intent. And then in conjunction with your larger awareness, it begins to create perceived experience. And what I realized after 20 years of lucid dreaming is that not only does that explain lucid dreaming, it also explains the dream world, and it also explains to a large degree the waking system. And so in my second book there, Lucid Dreaming Plain and Simple, I have a technique that anyone can use in the final chapter to see that they exist in a type of dream right now. And when I say a type of dream, what I mean is a mentally created environment. What I'm saying is that we all exist in a type of mental creation right now. And so this is the technique. Within yourself, find a neutral characteristic. Like it might be how funny you are. You're not really funny, you're not unfunny, you're neutral. You're so neutral when it comes to being funny that you don't even think about it. You're just neutral. So I want you to find a neutral characteristic. Then about 10 times a day for 1 minute, supersize your belief in that area. I'm the funniest person in America. There's never been anyone funnier than me. People laugh when I enter the room. It's hilarious. and just for 1 minute, 10 times a day, focus on how funny you are. Here's what will happen. If you do that day after day, by day 4 or 5 or 6, you'll be in the checkout line at the supermarket and you'll just say something totally innocuous and people will scream with laughter. And you'll be going here and there and just saying very benign things and people will roar with laughter. And what it begins to show you is that you're a projector of mental energy. When you build up a neutral belief and supersize it, then it gets projected out there without you having to do anything, and the world reflects back to you your beliefs. I had a woman in my workshop do it. She was in her 50s, mid-50s. She began to tell herself 10 times a day how beautiful and gorgeous she was. She was the most beautiful person on Bermuda. She said on day 4, a guy in his 30s asked her for her phone number. She said no one had asked her for her phone number in 25 years. She was blown away. She said she had to stop the practice because it was too alarming to think that her thoughts helped to create the experience that she then experienced. So again, lucid dreaming shows us a lot, and it shows us how that this reality that we think we're in, to a large part, is being created by our own mental energy, along with our larger self engaging with all the other beings.
What you just described is an affirmation, right? And that's in the Tony Robbins literature. But the ancient wisdom tradition would call an affirmation a mantra.
Right.
Let's linger there for a second, though. So there's a couple levels we've talked about here, like the level of our self, our conscious self, right? There's the level of accessing our unconscious self. And Ram, you stated about, all the figures in our dream are creation of our unconscious self. But Robert, I think you've mentioned a few times that you've interacted with what seemed like the creation of other, either conscious or unconscious people. And so there's another level that we haven't talked about. Can we go down to that level or up to that level, whichever way these are hierarchically defined? And what do you make of it? Is there another level? If so, what is that level of, consciousness or reality or unconsciousness, or I don't know the right term.
Right. It's interesting. What my lucid dreaming shows me is that on one level, I'm in my own dream bubble, but sometimes my dream bubble connects with other people in their dream bubbles, and we have basically a mutual lucid dream or a mutual dream experience or whatever. But then when you start to add in the layer of deceased people and others, then you're getting into a whole different level, because of course they're not physically alive in this moment in time. And so what it begins to show me, at least, is that we all exist within an interconnected oneness. And the oneness is basically awareness. And so it's not fundamentally physical. Physical is kind of the outer layer. I mean, it's kind of like whatever, a kind of interface or touch point or something. But fundamentally, that we're this conscious awareness. And when you get to the level of the interconnected oneness, you realize that everything interconnects. Everything is conscious and alive, and that fundamentally we all exist from the exact same source. So that's why, psychics picking up information or intuitions occurring and all, it all begins to make sense.
We came up on our talk about psychedelics.
Right. So what it suggests to me is that there's this realm of the waking reality where we're all separate and by ourselves. And then as we go deeper into source reality, that's when we begin to have greater and greater experiences of the interconnected oneness. And I think that's really the beauty of lucid dreaming. It takes you a while to get there. There's a lot of twists and turns. You got to work through your fears and all that kind of stuff. But what's time in a lucid dream? What's space in a lucid dream? What's the self in a lucid dream? When you begin to deconstruct these, all of a sudden you begin to have some just totally wild experiences.
What does a spiritual practice look like in lucid dreaming?
Right. So here's what I would say. Um, the first thing is you have to understand how you are connected with your experience. Your beliefs, expectation, focus, and intent, they attract experiences to you. Your reality, your perceived experience isn't benign or objective, and it's connected to where your head's at. If you don't like your current reality, the important thing is to change your head. That's the fundamental thing. So that's the beginning of what I would call the spiritual path. You have to understand the nature of mental energy, and then reaching out to the larger awareness. Then you begin to expand what this self is. This self is more than ego self, conscious self, Robert. Robert's connected to all these lives across space and time. And Robert is also connected to this larger awareness that exists in many respects behind this. And so as you go through this, you begin to work through your fears and your doubts. And also what I was taught is that I had to work through my limiting beliefs. My limiting ideas kept me from growing. My fear kept me from growing. And so it's not enough to fight your fear. You have to resolve it. You have to come to a higher realization, a higher understanding. And so that's what you begin to learn as you go along. And then if you just open yourself up to things, you'll start to go down the path.
Right. I mean, there are examples of nightmares, for example, that are recurring, but then someone addresses the nightmare and the symbolic figure becomes like the equivalent of a teddy bear. I don't know if you've got an anecdote like that you can share.
Yeah. So I remember a guy wrote me, he said he was having this recurring nightmare of being chased. And so the night before he was being chased, and he thought, wait a second, this is that same chase dream. Oh, this is a lucid dream. And so in my book, I always encourage people, turn and face what's chasing you and ask it, who are you? What do you represent? And he turned and faced it, and he asked the monster, who are you? Why are you chasing me? And it replied that it represented his fear of boredom. And so, when he woke up, he realized, oh, he does have a fear of boredom. And so he's always constantly being chased by it. But there's a lot of examples of people who have used this same sort of process with upset dream figures, and it's changed.
I would enjoy reading a book just about other people's lucid dreams, organized by like subject type. Is there anything like that out there?
Not as far as I'm aware, but in our magazine at luciddreamingmagazine.com, you can read a lot of examples of people's beautiful lucid dreams and start to make your own typology.
What are some of the other lessons you've brought back to kind of waking reality from your lucid dreaming experiences? Like one that I take away is the idea of question and be skeptical, right? In the lucid dream, you're looking for things that don't make sense together. You're reminding yourself to question reality.
Right. Well, it's just to be more aware, to look at, mindfully observe your own mind. For example, I resolved my hay fever by using lucid dreaming practices. So I realized I had a fear of hay fever that would occur here every August, September. So I became mindfully aware of it. I told myself, no, not now, not this year. And then I had to tell myself what I wanted to experience, what my unconscious should experience. And I told myself, this year I'll breathe easily and naturally. And by doing this waking process, the first year I had a 70% reduction. The next year I had a 90% reduction in hay fever symptoms. And now I just don't even have hay fever. So it began to show me how the unconscious mind works. And if you become mindfully aware of it and what's going on in the waking state, then you can overcome problems without even having to lucid dream.
Wow. This has been amazing. Robert, your books are available anywhere you want to purchase books. We've got Lucid Dreaming, Plain and Simple. You've written another book. This is your most recent book. Yeah, there's your first book.
Yeah, Lucid Dreaming, Gateway to the Inner Self. Yeah, you can find them online in major bookstores and all. You can also read about me and what I'm up to at lucidadvice.com, my website, lucidadvice.com. And you can also check out my magazine at Lucid Dreaming Magazine.
Show us that magazine one more time,
but
because is it a print one
yeah,
as well, or
it's
just
a lot of fun.
an e-zine these days?
Well, it's the thousands of people online get it for free. Some people ask for
and so it contains lucid dreams, or what's in the...
Yeah, I interview a lucid dreamer in each issue. Then we have like 6 or 7 articles on lucid dreaming. Then we'll have 15 pages of people just reader submitted lucid dreams. And sometimes those are the funnest because people do some wild stuff.
Where can we find you on social media as well?
Yeah, you can find me all over the place. Just type in Robert Waggoner and lucid dreaming, and
there we go. Robert, we're going to have to talk again. I think Ram and I are going to be doing some prompting and try to get some more lucid dreams going and figure out what reality is.
Great. Justin, Ram, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.